The snow fell like sifted ash, soft and endless, covering the pines in a hush that felt older than sorrow. Officer Elias Corvin guided his truck down the frost-bitten road, the headlights barely slicing through the silver fog. His K9, Ashen, sat in the passenger seat. Silent, alert, a creature carved from loyalty and light. Between them hung a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words because both hearts already carry too much noise. The radio hissed, the voice of dispatch fragile against the static. Unidentified distress call near Frostwood. Locals say they heard whimpering. The message trailed off, swallowed by snow. Elias didn't answer. He knew the forest well. It was where he came to breathe, where he came to remember and to forget. Frostwood had taken from him before. It had taken a child's faith, a partner's steadiness, and left him with the kind of guilt that nestles deep beneath the ribs. Quiet, stubborn, alive. Ashen stirred when the truck stopped, his paw pressing lightly against Elias's arm. The air outside was brittle with cold. The forest greeted them with that strange stillness that belongs to winter nights, when even the owls seem to hold their breath. Elias switched off the engine, the world shrinking to the sound of his boots crunching through snow and Ashen's steady breathing beside him. A moon hung thin above the trees, a shard of glass reflecting on ice. He followed the sound, distant, faint, the kind of whimper that tears at a man's composure. The path wound through black trunks veiled in frost, and he felt the old ache rise in him. The memory of a night years ago, another sound of pain, another creature too late to be saved. Back then, he'd been a younger man, steadier in voice, surer in heart. Now he walked slower. Each step carried the weight of every silence he hadn't broken, every promise he hadn't kept. When the clearing opened, Elias stopped. The air shifted, thick, heavy, trembling with something unspoken. Two shapes hung from a birch tree, silhouettes against the moon's pallor. For a heartbeat, he thought they were shadows, tricks of light and grief. But then the wind turned, and he saw the bodies. Two dogs, stiff and lifeless, ropes swaying gently in the winter air. Ashen whined, a low, wounded sound that made Elias's throat tighten. He stepped closer, boots sinking deep into the snow. The dog's fur was matted with frost, their eyes half open as if still waiting for mercy. Beneath them, the snow was disturbed, a circle of paw prints, strange and deliberate. And at the center, a patch of melted ground where no warmth should exist. Elias knelt. His breath fogged the air, trembling as he reached out to touch one of the ropes. The fibers were old but not weathered. This had been done recently, carefully. Whoever had done this hadn't wanted to hide it. They'd wanted to send a message. He looked up at the trees, at the dark fingers of branches that stretched toward the stars. The forest, silent before, now felt alive, watching, judging. By the time he returned to town, word had already spread. The grocer's wife stopped sweeping her porch to stare as he passed. Children were pulled indoors. Even the pastor's lantern dimmed when Elias's shadow fell across the church steps. The whispers followed him like ghosts. He found them. Cursed forest. Maybe the dogs are his doing. In small towns, grief travels faster than truth. At the station, Sheriff Marl Brune gave him a look that mixed pity and caution. "You're off this one, Corvin," he said, voice clipped. "You shouldn't have gone out alone." Elias didn't argue. He'd learned that silence was a better shield than protest. But when Brune spoke again, "People remember what happened last time, you know." Something inside Elias twisted. Last time. The words clung like frost to bone. That night he sat by his window, watching snow drift under the street lamps. The town slept, but Frostwood did not. He could feel its pulse from here. The quiet, living ache of something unresolved. Ashen lay at his feet, eyes half closed but ears twitching toward the forest. Elias reached down, fingers brushing the dog's fur. "They think I'm losing it," he murmured. Ashen's tail thumped once in reply. Loyalty didn't need to understand. It only needed to stay. By midnight, the decision had already formed in his chest like a slow-burning coal. He left the house without turning on a light. The forest met him with open arms, its darkness thick as velvet. Each breath left a ghost in the air. The snow had deepened since morning, covering all signs of what he'd seen, except for the faint trail of his own footprints, leading him back to the birch tree. When he reached it, the ropes hung empty. The bodies were gone. Only the faint markings on the bark remained, scratches carved by something small, deliberate. He leaned closer and saw it. E+L Lydia Everin. The name came like a whisper. The animal caretaker who used to live near the edge of Frostwood. The one who called every stray by name, who believed even cruelty could be unlearned if you just loved hard enough. Her shelter had burned last winter. They'd said it was an accident, but she'd vanished soon after. The town stopped saying her name, as if forgetting her might make the tragedy less uncomfortable. Elias stared at the initials until his vision blurred. The cold bit through his gloves, but he didn't move. He remembered the way Lydia used to speak, to her dogs, to him, to anyone who'd listen. "You can tell what kind of soul a town has," she'd once said, "by how it treats its quietest creatures." He had believed her then, and perhaps that's why he never forgave himself when the fire came. Something rustled behind him. Ashen stiffened but didn't growl. Instead, he tilted his head, ears twitching toward a faint sound. Soft scratching, like claws on wood. Elias followed it through the birch trees to a half-buried cabin, forgotten beneath a quilt of snow. Its door hung crooked, the hinges rusted and sighing. Inside, the air smelled of old smoke and fur. He stepped carefully, the beam of his flashlight trembling across the floor. Then he saw it. A pup, no older than a few months, curled in the corner, shivering so violently it made the floorboards creak. Its fur was matted, one paw twisted, eyes clouded with fear. Elias knelt, slow, cautious. Ashen approached too, tail low, his presence soft as breath. For a moment the pup flinched. Then, sensing something beyond scent or sound, perhaps mercy, it whimpered and inched forward. Elias reached out a gloved hand. The pup pressed its head against his palm and let out a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. He wrapped it in his coat, feeling the small heartbeat against his chest. "You're safe now," he said. Though he wasn't sure if he meant it for the pup or for himself. Ashen stood beside him, watching, quiet and still as the trees outside. Snow began to fall again, heavier this time, each flake catching the light like dust from a broken halo. Elias looked toward the forest's edge. The birch tree stood in the distance, its branches whispering something only the heart could hear. When he returned to town, the street lamps flickered as though startled awake. He placed the pup on his table, fed it what little he had, milk, warmth, silence. Ashen lay close, his body curled protectively around the smaller one. The sight struck Elias in a place words couldn't reach. He sat down beside them, eyes stinging, not from the cold, but from the slow realization that he still cared enough to hurt. The wind outside howled softly, wrapping itself around the house like a song of mourning. But inside, a fragile peace took root. Elias stared into the dark, his thoughts circling like snowflakes that never landed. Somewhere beyond the glass, Frostwood breathed again. He could feel it, pulsing faintly beneath the frost, waiting. He didn't know what the melted circle meant, or why the initials were carved there, or who would hang two creatures in such a cruel display. But he knew this. He could not turn away again. Not this time. Ashen lifted his head, eyes reflecting the low firelight. The pup twitched in its sleep, a tiny sound escaping its throat. Elias reached out, resting his palm against Ashen's back. "Maybe grace," he whispered, "doesn't come roaring. It limps in on frostbitten paws." Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the town's lamplight until all that remained was white silence. Yet beneath that silence, something had begun to stir, a quiet resolve, fragile but alive, like the first heartbeat beneath a thawing world. And in that stillness, Officer Elias Corvin understood that Frostwood's ghosts had never truly left. They'd merely been waiting for someone willing to listen. The blizzard came without warning, white curtains sweeping through the valley, the wind screaming against the window panes like something ancient and grieving. Officer Elias Corvin stood by the glass, his reflection fractured between flakes of frost. Ashen stirred near the fire, the rescued pup nestled close to his side, both blanketed in a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The storm had silenced the town, but Elias felt the forest calling through the howling wind, as if Frostwood itself had something left to confess. He hadn't slept properly in days. Each time his eyes closed, he saw the hanged dogs swaying beneath that birch tree, the melted snow beneath them pulsing like a heartbeat. The initials carved into the bark haunted him more than any nightmare could. Eplazel Lydia Everin. Her name had become a kind of prayer, spoken rarely, whispered often, carried on the cold breath of gossip. The people of Frostwood had buried her story long ago, but Elias couldn't. He had buried too many things already. By dawn, the storm had weakened into silence. He dressed slowly, his movements deliberate, as if the air itself might shatter. Ashen watched him with that knowing stillness dogs possess when they sense something inevitable. "Stay," Elias murmured, though both of them knew he wouldn't listen to his own command if their places were reversed. He left the cabin and stepped into the world of white. The air was sharp enough to slice breath in half. The forest loomed ahead, dark veins against the pallid sky. Lydia's cottage waited on the far edge of Frostwood, near the frozen creek where no one went anymore. He remembered the path well. It was where she'd once gathered strays, where she'd spoken softly to animals that others called broken. The door now hung open, the hinges breathing out the faintest cry as the wind passed through. Inside, dust lay thick over her belongings, but traces of her lingered. A chipped bowl on the table, a shawl still folded by the hearth, and the faint scent of pine soap beneath the rot. He found the journal under a pile of old newspapers, its edges singed and brittle. The first few pages were filled with simple records, names of dogs, feeding times, sketches of paw prints, but the handwriting grew more erratic the further he turned. Lines overlapped, sentences trembled. They mock me for caring too much. They don't understand that mercy is not a weakness, but a vow. Elias's throat tightened. He turned another page. The fire wasn't an accident. He warned me not to speak. If the forest must take them, may it take me too. He stopped breathing for a moment. The ink had bled where tears must have fallen. On the final page, scorched and half erased, was a single initial, B. Sheriff Marl Brune. Elias felt the world tilt. He'd known Brune for 15 years, the kind of man who hid cruelty beneath small-town charm, who laughed too loud and listened too little. It made terrible sense now. The sheriff had forbidden Elias from investigating not out of concern, but fear. He folded the journal and slipped it inside his coat. Outside, the light had dimmed again. The forest seemed to close in as he made his way back, every branch heavy with ice, every step an echo of an older sorrow. He could feel eyes on him. No, not human. Something older, gentler, but watching all the same. At the station, Brune was waiting by the door, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "You look tired," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Told you to stay clear of that place." Elias said nothing. He set the journal on the desk, open to the burned pages. The sheriff's gaze flickered once, a heartbeat of recognition before the mask returned. "You shouldn't believe everything you read," Brune said softly. "The woman was unstable." "She was kind," Elias replied, voice barely more than air. "That's what frightened this town, isn't it?" Brune stubbed out his cigarette, his hand trembling just slightly. "Let it go, Corvin. It's over." But Elias had seen the ash on his boots, the same fine glittering dust from the burnt birch grove. He didn't need a confession. The truth had already spoken through silence. He left without another word. The sun was fading fast, melting into bruised violet clouds. The snow began again, heavy and wet, falling in thick sheets that blurred the edges of the world. As darkness deepened, a sound rose through the wind, a distant, familiar howl. Ashen. Elias's pulse quickened. He turned toward the forest, boots breaking through drifts that reached his knees. The trees swayed like slow pendulums, their branches whispering secrets to one another. The howl came again, closer, urgent. He followed it into the heart of Frostwood, until he reached the birch clearing. The ropes were gone. The branches hung bare, and the snow beneath them was disturbed. Fresh paw prints circled the melted patch again, smaller ones this time, leading away toward the frozen lake. Ashen emerged from the fog, fur matted with ice, barking in short bursts as if calling him to witness something. Elias followed, his breath burning cold in his chest. The lake shimmered ahead, half frozen, the surface broken by clusters of reeds that bent beneath the weight of snow. Then he saw her, at first a figure barely visible through the white haze, her movements weak, uncertain. Lydia. For a moment, he thought his mind had turned to ghosts. But then she fell to her knees, and the sound she made was too human to belong to memory. Elias ran to her, the ice cracking beneath his boots. When he reached her, she was trembling violently, her lips blue, her eyes hollow but alive. "They're gone," she whispered. He took them all. He wrapped his coat around her, the same one that had saved the pup. She smelled of smoke and pine, of someone who had hidden too long. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice breaking. "He'll find out." "I already know," Elias replied quietly. "And he won't touch you again." She looked at him for a long time, disbelief softening into something fragile and raw. When her hand brushed his, it was a gesture small enough to be missed, but full enough to change everything. They moved toward his cabin through the thickening snow. By the time they arrived, the forest had fallen silent again. Inside, the fire had burned low. Ashen pressed against Lydia's legs, tail wagging gently, and the pup stumbled forward, recognizing her by scent alone. She knelt, tears spilling down her cheeks as she gathered it into her arms. "You made it," she whispered, voice trembling with wonder. That night, Elias sat across from her by the fire, the storm quiet around them. She told him the rest. The shelter burned not by accident, but by the sheriff's order. Lydia had discovered his ring of illegal dogfights. The money passed quietly through the town's veins. When she refused to stay silent, he destroyed everything she loved and made the town believe she'd taken her own life. She'd fled into the forest, surviving on what little the land gave, unseen, unheard. Elias listened in silence, the flames painting her face in gold and shadow. Every word she spoke felt like a wound reopening in both of them. But there was strength in her voice, too, a slow, deliberate reclaiming of her own story. When dawn broke, Frostwood woke to chaos. Sheriff Brune's house stood empty, his truck half buried in snow by the northern road. No one saw him leave, and no one went looking. In towns like Frostwood, some disappearances feel like blessings. By spring, the old shelter had been rebuilt. The townsfolk came with lumber and silence, each hammer strike a small penance. They named it Lydia's Refuge, though she insisted it belonged to no one. Elias visited often, helping her mend fences, fix roofs, and listen to the stories she told about every creature that wandered in. Their conversations were sparse, but their silences spoke like scripture. Sometimes she'd brush snow from his sleeve, and sometimes he'd pour her coffee without asking. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something slower, deeper, earned. A year later, winter returned, but gentler this time. Children played near the fence line, tossing snowballs while Ashen and the pup, now grown and called Mercy, chased each other through the drifts. Lydia laughed softly, and Elias realized he hadn't heard that sound in years. He stood beneath the birch tree where it had all begun. Its branches no longer carried rope, only ribbons, tied by the townspeople in memory of what they'd lost and found. The wind caught one, lifting it like a fragile flag of forgiveness. The forest no longer felt haunted. It breathed again, alive with the quiet music of things healed but not forgotten. Elias looked toward the horizon where the snow met sky and spoke softly, as if to someone listening beyond sight. "I once thought the forest held only silence," he said. "But silence is just a breath before forgiveness speaks." Ashen barked once, the sound carrying through the pines, clear and bright. Lydia turned, her eyes meeting his with the calm of someone who had finally come home. He thought of all the ghosts they'd buried, not beneath the snow, but within themselves, and how mercy, once offered, has a way of thawing even the coldest ground. As the light faded, the forest whispered again, not of fear but of grace. And somewhere within that whisper, Elias Corvin understood that redemption wasn't a thunderclap. It was a quiet, persistent warmth, arriving on four paws, carrying forgiveness between the trees. If this tale left your heart a little warmer, stay with us for more whispered tales, stories that breathe frost, faith, and forgiveness into the quiet corners of our souls. Subscribe.